Looking back now, Lieutenant Colonel O.B. Johnson could hardly believe what they had accomplished. The man who shot down that Focke-Wulf FW-190 while his own P-61 was already damaged by flak had witnessed something extraordinary. His squadron had helped change warfare forever. But the story didn't start with Johnson's heroics over Normandy. It began years earlier in burning London. The Blitz had started in 1940. German bombers were turning British cities into hell under cover of darkness. British successes against German daylight bombers forced the Luftwaffe to shift to night bombing. The Royal Air Force was struggling to respond. The problem was simple, yet seemingly impossible to solve. By the time RAF Spitfires could launch, climb out, and try to intercept these raids, the bomber crews had usually dropped their loads and turned for home. What was needed was an aircraft that could patrol the night skies for hours. It needed to detect enemy aircraft in total darkness, and it had to deliver devastating firepower when the moment came. Across the Atlantic, American military observers were taking careful notes. They realized something crucial. If the United States entered this global conflict, they too would need to master the art of night warfare. In December 1940, the U.S. Army Air Corps issued a requirement that would change aerial combat forever. They wanted a dedicated night fighter. The specification was ambitious, almost impossibly so. An aircraft was needed to patrol the skies over England for up to 7 hours during the night. Then follow radar vectors to attack German aircraft before they reached their target. It needed to carry advanced radar equipment, heavy weapons, and a crew capable of operating in complete darkness. Most aviation experts believed such an aircraft was pure fantasy. But Jack Northrop thought differently. In the California workshops of the Northrop Corporation, an extraordinary machine was taking shape. The P61 Black Widow was the first United States aircraft designed from the start to find and destroy other aircraft at night. And in bad weather, Jack Northrop's team was creating something the world had never seen before. The design was radical, almost alien in appearance. Twin engines sat in nacelles that flowed smoothly into twin tailbooms. They were connected by a central wing and horizontal stabilizer. The cockpit section was bulbous. It housed not just a pilot, but a dedicated radar operator and sometimes a gunner. At nearly 50 feet long with a 66-foot wingspan, it was closer in size to a medium bomber than a conventional fighter. Named for the North American spider, Latrodectus mactans, the Black Widow was designed to be beautiful in its lethality. But it was the invisible technology hidden within its nose that would make it truly revolutionary. The SCR-720 airborne interception radar was a marvel of wartime engineering. The radar weighed more than 400 pounds. It could detect other aircraft from about 3 miles to as much as 20 miles away. For the first time in history, a fighter aircraft could literally see in the dark. It could track enemy aircraft through clouds, fog, and the blackest night. The first test flight was made on May 26, 1942. Test pilot Vance Breese lifted the prototype into the California sky. Despite its size, the Black Widow handled like a true fighter. The only prohibited flight moves were outside loops, sustained inverted flight, and deliberate spins. For a machine the size of a bomber, its agility was remarkable. But it was the aircraft's weapons that truly earned it the Black Widow name. It was an all-metal twin-engine, twin-boom design armed with 4 forward-firing 20mm Hispano M2 autocannon in the lower fuselage, plus 4 50-caliber M2 Browning machine guns in a dorsal gun turret. When all weapons fired at once, the Black Widow could deliver more concentrated firepower than almost any fighter in the world. Yet challenges emerged quickly. The 4-gun top turret was the same type fitted to the top forward position on the Boeing B-29 Super Fortress. and that bomber had production priority over the P-61. As a result, several hundred P-61s did not have this turret. More concerning, those that did experienced severe buffeting when the turret rotated, a problem that would take months to resolve. As 1943 progressed, and the first production aircraft rolled off the assembly lines, the Black Widow faced its harshest critics, not from the enemy, but from within the American military establishment. Some generals questioned whether such a large, complex aircraft could truly function as a fighter. Others worried about its speed, which at 366 miles per hour was respectable, but not spectacular. The situation got worse in May 1944. The squadrons learned that several USAF generals, including General Hoyt Vandenberg, believed the P-61 lacked the capability to successfully engage German fighters and bombers. They thought it was too slow. The criticism stung, particularly because the aircraft had yet to prove itself in combat. The British Royal Air Force initially showed interest in the Black Widow. They conducted their own evaluation and reached a disappointing conclusion. This aircraft was later returned in February of 1945. The RAF were not particularly impressed with its performance. They found its maximum range to be far too low. They preferred their own de Havilland Mosquito, which had already proven itself in night combat over Europe. The tensions came to a head in July 1944. General Spaatz ordered a competition to be held between the P-61 and a Mosquito NF-117. They used an example from the 422nd, which had been tweaked to get maximum performance for the competition. The stakes were enormous. The future of American night fighting hung in the balance. Colonel Winston Kratz, director of night fighter training in the USAF, had organized a similar competition earlier. He had made a $500 bet in favor of the Mosquito. He was confident the British aircraft would dominate. The results shocked everyone. After mechanics in the 422nd Night Fighter Squadron tweaked the P-61 for maximum performance, the hot-rodded Black Widow proved faster at all altitudes. It outturned the Mosquito at every altitude, and by a big margin, and far surpassed the Mosquito in rate of climb. The American crews had given their aircraft everything it had, and the Black Widow had responded magnificently. Yet questions remained about whether this was a fair test. There never seemed to be enough Mosquitoes to undertake the many missions the Royal Air Force found for the aircraft. The British may have lost the competition on purpose to keep more Mosquitoes for their own use. Now, let's jump forward to the real proof. The 422nd was the first night fighter squadron to be assigned to 9th Air Force in England. They were about to write the first chapter in the Black Widow's combat history. In England, the 422nd NFS finally received their first P-61s in late June. They began flying operational missions over England in mid-July. These initial missions were not against conventional aircraft. They were against a new German terror weapon that was traumatizing London: the V-1 flying bomb. The 422nd NFS conducted its first combat mission on July 6, 1944. Not against piloted enemy airplanes, but pilotless V-1 buzz bombs. These primitive cruise missiles were fast, flying at 350 miles per hour. They required precise interception techniques. The first P-61 engagement in the European theater occurred on July 15th. A P-61, piloted by Lieutenant Hermann Ernst, was directed to intercept a V-1 Doodlebug. The mission nearly ended in disaster. Diving from above and behind to match the V-1's 350 mph speed, the P-61's plastic rear cone imploded under the pressure. The attack was aborted, but the Americans learned quickly. On July 16th, Lieutenant Ernst was again directed to attack a V-1. This time was successful, giving the 422nd NFS and the European theater its first P-61 kill. Black Widow crews shot down 8 more buzz bombs before the war ended. Meanwhile, in the Pacific Theater, another chapter was being written. Members of the 6th NFS achieved the first victory over an aerial opponent by anyone flying a P61. Pilot Second Lieutenant Dale F. Haberman and radar officer Lieutenant Raymond P. Mooney shot down a Mitsubishi G4M Betty bomber on the night of June 30, 1944, over Saipan. They were flying a Black Widow nicknamed Moon Happy. The psychological impact was immediate. Japanese bomber crews, who had grown used to operating with complete safety under cover of darkness, suddenly found themselves being hunted by an invisible predator. Soon, Black Widows controlled the night skies. In early August 1944, the 422nd NFS transferred to Maupertus, France. They began to encounter German aircraft for the first time. The airfield near Cherbourg put them within striking distance of German bombers attempting to harass Allied forces pushing inland from the Normandy beaches. The Black Widow crews were entering a deadly game of cat and mouse. German pilots, veterans of years of night operations, initially viewed the strange American aircraft with a mixture of curiosity and amusement. The twin-boom configuration was unlike anything they had encountered. Many assumed it was some sort of experimental reconnaissance aircraft. They were tragically mistaken. Which brings us back to that fateful night of August 14, 1944. High above the darkened fields of Normandy, Hauptmann Stoller of the Luftwaffe's Kampfgeschwader 40 was returning from another night bombing mission. His Heinkel, Heinkel 177, Greif was a massive 4-engine beast, one of Germany's most advanced bombers. Stoller had good reason to feel confident in the darkness. The night had always belonged to the hunters, not the hunted. But tonight, something was different. Tonight, something was stalking him through the velvet black sky. The radar operator aboard the American P61 Impatient Widow had been tracking the German bomber for 15 minutes. In the pitch darkness 3 miles below, French civilians slept fitfully in their beds. Above them, a technological revolution was unfolding. For the first time in aviation history, an aircraft designed from the ground up to own the night was about to prove its deadly worth. When Stoller first caught sight of the strange, twin-boom silhouette emerging from the darkness, witnesses later reported he radioed his fellow pilots with something approaching laughter. The ungainly American aircraft looked more like a flying experiment than a serious threat. The laughter would not last long. The crew of Impatient Widow, pilot, radar operator, and gunner, represented the cutting edge of a new kind of warfare, one where technology and training mattered more than traditional fighter-pilot instincts. The engagement lasted only minutes, but it would be talked about in both American and German intelligence circles for months to come. The Impatient Widow had its starboard engine shot out along with oil lines and hydraulics. It went down north of Barfleur, Normandy. The downing was witnessed by 2 other Heinkels, but the damage was done. The Black Widow had announced its presence in European skies with devastating effect. What German pilots didn't realize was that this encounter represented just the beginning. However, a P-61 shot down a Messerschmitt Bf-110. Shortly afterwards, the squadron's commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel O.B. Johnson, his P-61 already damaged by anti-aircraft ground fire, shot down a Focke-Wulf FW-190. The Americans had drawn first blood. The psychological impact rippled through Luftwaffe squadrons across occupied Europe. The official report filed by German intelligence was telling in its nervous tone, "American night fighter of unknown type encountered. Aircraft larger than expected for single-seat fighter. Unusual twin-boom configuration. Radar-directed attacks suggest advanced intercept capability." The report concluded with a recommendation that would have seemed absurd just months earlier. Recommend extreme caution during night operations. The paint scheme was crucial to the Black Widow's psychological impact. 3 paint schemes were tested: olive drab with a flat black underside, all flat black, and gloss black. During searchlight tests, when the olive drab and flat black painted aircraft passed the searchlight beams, they were easily detected. However, when the gloss black aircraft flew across the beam, it was nearly invisible. The final paint scheme was a revelation. The gloss black finish didn't just help with camouflage, it created an almost supernatural appearance. Afterwards, P61s were painted gloss black, which became the Black Widow's trademark. Ground crews and pilots alike began to speak of their aircraft with an almost superstitious reverence. The mystique was intentional and effective. One could imagine this mysterious nocturnal black guard lurking in the depths of night and claiming victims without even knowing what hit them. She was a venomous, dark lady. The very sight of a Black Widow gleaming like wet obsidian in the moonlight was enough to unnerve experienced combat pilots. German intelligence officers were struggling to understand this new threat. Initial reports described aircraft of impossible size for a fighter, with strange twin-boom configurations and seemingly magical abilities to appear and disappear in the darkness. Some dismissed these accounts as the fantasies of frightened bomber crews. Others began to realize that the Americans had achieved something revolutionary. From September to November, ground control directed the 422nd's P61s into a total of 461 chases. This resulted in 282 airborne radar contacts, 174 sightings, 20 of which were positively identified as enemy aircraft, and only 7 were shot down. The numbers tell a story of a learning curve, both for the American crews mastering their revolutionary technology and for the German pilots trying to understand what was hunting them. The Black Widow's radar gave it an almost supernatural ability to track targets in conditions where human vision was useless. On moonless nights in thick cloud cover, during storms that grounded conventional fighters, the P-61 could still find its prey. German bomber crews began reporting encounters with aircraft that seemed to materialize out of nowhere, as if the darkness itself had come alive. The aircraft's appearance was as much a psychological weapon as its radar. Ground crews and pilots alike began to speak of their aircraft with an almost superstitious reverence. German intelligence officers collected increasingly desperate reports from bomber crews. Aircraft that appeared and disappeared like phantoms. Mysterious contacts that seemed to anticipate their every move. Enemy fighters that struck with devastating precision, then vanished back into the darkness before any countermeasures could be taken. Flight Lieutenant Klaus Weber of Kampfgeschwader 76 later wrote in his diary, "The Americans have unleashed something unnatural in the night skies. We call it der schwarze Tod, the Black Death. You cannot see it coming. You cannot hear it approaching. The first sign that it has found you is often the last thing you ever experience." By December 1944, the moment of truth had arrived. 61s of the 422nd and 425th NFS were helping to repel the German offensive known as the Battle of the Bulge. 2 were flying cover over the town of Bastogne. The Black Predators prowled the winter skies above the Ardennes, their radar sweeping constantly for targets. The encounters during this period were some of the most intense of the war. German pilots flying in support of ground forces were forced to operate at lower altitudes and in predictable patterns. The P-61s could position themselves along known approach routes and wait like spiders in a web. Not every encounter ended in American victory. The Black Widow had limitations, and experienced German pilots learned to exploit them. In October 1944, a P-61 of the 422nd NFS encountered a Messerschmitt Me 163 attempting to land. The P-61 tried to intercept it, but the rocket-powered aircraft was gliding too fast. A week later, another P-61 spotted a Messerschmitt Me 262 jet, but was also unable to intercept the jet. On yet another occasion, a 422nd P-61 spotted a Messerschmitt Me 410 Hornisse flying at treetop level. But as the P-61 dove on it, the Hornet sped away. The P-61 was unable to catch it. These encounters revealed the Black Widow's Achilles heel: speed. Unfortunately, the P-61 wasn't particularly fast, and it turned out that did matter. All the P-61A and B Black Widows that saw combat had supercharged but unturbocharged Pratt & Whitney R2800 engines. Against Germany's newest aircraft, speed mattered more than radar and firepower. The Black Widow didn't have a particularly good rate of climb, only 500 feet per minute at 20,000 feet, which is roughly the climb rate of a small single-engine light plane, and it rapidly ran out of power at 20,000 feet as the superchargers reached their limit. German pilots flying the new generation of aircraft could simply outrun their American hunters. But these limitations didn't diminish the Black Widow's overall impact. Contrary to popular stories, no P-61 ever engaged in combat with a German jet or any of the late-war advanced Luftwaffe aircraft. The most commonly encountered and destroyed Luftwaffe aircraft types were Junkers Ju 188s, Junkers Ju 52s, Bf 110s, Fw 190s, Dornier Du 217s, and Heinkel He 111s. These were the aircraft that formed the backbone of German night operations, and the Black Widow was devastatingly effective against them. Behind every successful P-61 mission were the crews who had mastered this revolutionary form of warfare. The 422nd NFS produced 3 ace pilots and 2 ace radar operators. Radar operators and gunners shared kills with the pilot. These men represented a new breed of warrior, combining traditional pilot skills with cutting-edge technology. The radar operators, in particular, developed an almost mystical reputation. These specialists could read their green glowing scopes like ancient oracles reading tea leaves. They detected patterns and movements that would escape ordinary eyes. They guided their pilots through complex intercepts in total darkness, often while under fire from defensive gunners. But the war extracted its price from these elite units. Lieutenant Cletus Tommy Ormsby of the 425th NFS was officially credited with 3 victories. Ormsby was killed by friendly fire moments after attacking 2 Junkers Ju-87 Stukas on the night of March 24, 1945. His radar operator escaped with serious injuries and was saved only by the quick actions of German surgeons. The irony was bitter. Ormsby and his crew had successfully engaged and shot down both enemy aircraft, only to be destroyed by their own side in the confusion of night combat. It highlighted the dangers these crews faced, not just from the enemy, but from the fundamental challenges of operating in complete darkness, in a sky filled with both friendly and hostile aircraft. While the European Black Widows were stalking German bombers over France and Belgium, their Pacific cousins were writing their own chapter in the night fighter story. The war in the Pacific presented different challenges: vast distances, isolated bases, and an enemy with very different tactics. However, on June 30, 1944, a Mitsubishi Betty became the first P-61 kill in the Pacific. Soon, Black Widows controlled the night skies. Japanese bomber crews, who had grown used to harassing Allied positions with complete safety under cover of darkness, suddenly found themselves being hunted by an invisible predator. The psychological impact in the Pacific was even more pronounced than in Europe. Japanese military culture placed enormous emphasis on honor and spiritual strength. But there was something deeply unsettling about being hunted by an enemy you couldn't see. Reports began filtering back to Japanese intelligence about American night demons that could strike from the darkness without warning. As 1945 dawned, the war was clearly nearing its end. But the Black Widow's most dramatic moments were still to come. On the night of August 14, 15, a P61 named Lady in the Dark by her crew encountered an intruding Nakajima Ki-43 Hayabusa, Peregrine Falcon, Oscar, and eventually forced it into the sea without firing a shot. The encounter was almost surreal. Japan had officially surrendered, but not all Japanese pilots had received or accepted the news. Lady in the Dark was on patrol when her radar operator detected the intruder. What followed was a deadly game of cat and mouse in the darkness above the Pacific. Lady in the Dark didn't fire a single shot, forcing the Japanese aircraft down into the sea while giving chase. The American crew used their superior technology and training to position their aircraft in such a way that the Japanese pilot, perhaps realizing he was outmatched, chose to ditch his aircraft rather than continue the engagement. But the story wasn't over. Although the war was officially over, no one was sure that all of the Japanese had heard the message and stopped fighting. The American night fighters flew again the next night, and Lady in the Dark again found a target. It was a Nakajima Ki-44 Shoki, Demon Tojo. The fighters maneuvered wildly as they attempted to gain an advantage. This final engagement would be remembered as possibly the last aerial combat of World War II. The P-61 crew lost and reacquired the Ki-44 several times, then finally lost it for good and returned to base. The next day, ground troops found the wrecked Tojo. The Black Widow had claimed what may have been the final aerial victory of the war. By war's end, the statistics told an impressive story. Black Widow crews destroyed 127 enemy aircraft and 18 robot V-1 buzz bombs. But these numbers, significant as they were, didn't capture the full impact of the P-61 program. The Black Widow had fundamentally changed night warfare. Before its introduction, darkness had been a refuge for bomber crews and a challenge for defenders. The P-61 reversed this equation, making night operations dangerous for the attacker and advantageous for the defender. What had started as a pure night fighter had evolved into a multi-role predator. In December 1944, the 425th began using 5-inch diameter HVAR, high-velocity aerial rockets to attack trucks, trains, and structures. The P-61's 20mm cannons proved highly effective in destroying large numbers of German locomotives and trucks. The P-61's influence extended far beyond World War II. The P-61 paved the way for future night fighters. It influenced the design of the F-82 Twin Mustang, Korean War-era night fighter, the F-4 Phantom II, which incorporated advanced radar combat tactics. The lessons learned in creating the P-61 would lead directly to the modern concept of the all-weather interceptor. In 1950, they introduced the radar-equipped Lockheed F-94 Starfire, a direct replacement for the F-82s that had themselves replaced the P-61. After that, virtually every interceptor produced around the world had some level of all-weather capability. The Black Widow had pioneered technologies and tactics that would become standard in modern air forces. Airborne radar, multi-crew coordination, ground-controlled intercepts, and night precision attacks. All of these concepts were refined and proven in the crucible of P-61 operations. With the war over, the Army canceled further production. Most of these airplanes participated in the first good aerial photographic survey of the Pacific Islands. A few, plus some special-purpose P-61s, stayed in active service until 1950. The Black Widow's operational career was ending, but its legacy was just beginning. The last operational Black Widow of the 68th Fighter Squadron, 347th Fighter Group, left Japan in May 1950, missing the Korean War by only a month. It was a poignant end for an aircraft that had revolutionized aerial warfare. Retired just as a new conflict began, one where its capabilities would have been invaluable. But perhaps the most fitting tribute to the P-61 came from an unexpected source. After the war, German night fighter pilots, when interviewed by Allied intelligence officers, consistently spoke of the American Black Widow with a mixture of professional respect and genuine fear. Oberst Werner Streib, one of Germany's leading night fighter aces, reportedly said, "The Americans created something we had never imagined possible. An aircraft that owned the night more completely than we ever had." The story of the P-61 Black Widow is ultimately a story about the power of innovation and the courage of the crews who flew these remarkable machines. In the span of just a few years, American engineers had created an aircraft that fundamentally changed aerial warfare, and American aircrew had mastered the complex art of night fighting. The German pilots, who had initially laughed at the strange twin-boom aircraft, had learned a harsh lesson about underestimating American ingenuity. What looked ungainly and experimental was actually a revolutionary weapon system. It combined cutting-edge technology with devastating firepower and exceptional crew training. The Black Widow represented more than just another aircraft. It embodied the American approach to warfare in World War II. Where other nations relied on traditional tactics and existing technology, America invested in research, development, and the kind of systematic innovation that could turn radical concepts into battlefield reality. Today, as we look back on the P-61's brief but remarkable career, we can see its influence in every modern fighter aircraft. The integration of radar and weapon systems, the concept of multi-crew coordination, the emphasis on all-weather capability. All of these trace their lineage back to Jack Northrop's revolutionary night fighter. With just 127 victories to its credit, the Northrop P-61 was a minor player in WW2's air combat. But its influence extended far beyond that wartime role. The Black Widow proved that in warfare, as in nature, it's not always the biggest or fastest predator that dominates. Sometimes it's the one that can see in the dark. The night skies above Europe and the Pacific would never again belong solely to the aggressor. Thanks to the Black Widow and the brave crews who flew her, darkness itself had become an ally of freedom. The strange aircraft that German pilots had once mocked had become the master of the night. And its legacy continues to protect free nations to this day. In the end, the P-61 Black Widow was more than just a fighter aircraft. It was a glimpse into the future of aerial warfare, a future where technology and training mattered more than tradition, where innovation trumped assumption, and where the side that could see furthest into the darkness would ultimately control the skies.